Thank you. Opal, as a founder of Black Lives Matter, does the inauguration of Donald Trump change the mission or the emphasis of the movement?
Absolutely not. Our mission remains the same. It remains the same as it did when our ancestors were kidnapped from Africa and brought here, when indigenous people were made to deal with this theft of their land and were experienced genocide. Our mission remains the same. And so at this moment in our time, we are committed to building a democracy that in fact works for all of us. And we are committed to doubling down our efforts, and we're partnering with people from all different walks of life who also share the same commitment to human rights and dignity. And we're partnering with our brothers and sisters and siblings from all across the globe in this mandate of ours. And it's one that is going to take every single one of us. We're not living in normal times. I think that's what I'm really sitting with in this moment. I'm very sober about what time it is, very sober in the fact that we have to call on our ancestors, call on the God, our gods that we serve, that we have to find the spiritual conviction and courage that is required to resist at every single level. That's what's required of us in this time.
And Shaun King, as someone who's also been involved with Black Lives Matter, same question. And also for you, how does it change your focus, if it does, as a daily news columnist?
Well, I agree with everything that Opal has said, but in addition to that, the election of Donald Trump is different. I sense even in this room and around our country a deep sense of dread, even of confusion and frustration, and a lot of it is wonderment, what is going to happen next? Like we see what candidate Trump is, and we see what President-elect Trump is, and we're so disturbed and troubled by that. And this is a man who does not yet have the power of the Oval Office. And so, in a lot of ways, Brian, I think one of the greatest living lieutenants of the civil rights movement who worked and served under Dr. King is John Lewis. And, you know, what he said is something I've never heard a sitting congressman ever say about a president, is that Donald Trump is an illegitimate president. And it was a bold statement to make. And so when we operate, and I agree with Congressman Lewis. And I've been reading over this weekend words of Dr. King, and when we think about when he says, don't judge someone by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Well, if we apply that rubric to Donald Trump and choose to ignore the orange hue of his skin, but judge him by the content of his character, it's deeply problematic. And so people are quick to say, well, you are doing now what they did to Obama. But it's a false equivalency. They're not the same person. And our motivation is not the same. And so I tweeted in Facebook this map of the United States, and it shocked the hell out of me. It was a map, and it showed the states that the Democratic Party currently controls. And not that Democrat equals righteous, because it doesn't. And I've spoken out about that for years. However, the map showed that Democrats currently control 4 states: California, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Hawaii. And in essence, what we're saying is that Democrats have been out-organized and out-foxed in 46 states, and that Republicans will now control the Senate, the House, and the presidency. And so how we respond to that next week can't be like how it was last week. And if we want to see the world change in any substantive way, we have to out-organize. More of us have to out-organize those who mean us harm. And so I'm not content with the work that we're doing. I feel like the level of outrage in our country does not match our action. And we have to somehow, the answer is not to tone down the outrage. Be outraged. The answer is to bring up your action. And in this room and in rooms all across the country, we have to figure out ways to commit our lives and our daily actions to solving the problems that we see.
So, Natalia, I'll pick right up there with you as an activist who works intersectionally across different kinds of what we usually think of as activist group lines. What kinds of actions do you think might be most appropriate to the moment, most effective for the moment, or can't anyone even know yet? Because as Shaun says, we know what Donald Trump was as a candidate, we know what he is as a president-elect, but we don't actually know what he and the Congress will do once they're in office.
Well, what we do know, and let's start with that, is that as people of color, right, in this country, we have been living another reality that I think a lot of people after the elections woke up to, right? A lot of people were like, I can't believe he got elected. How is this possible? We are so far in our rights. And I think that this election exactly said to other folks, to the folks who were okay with him running on a racist platform, to the folks who haven't stood up for the Black community, for the immigrant community, for the LGBTQ community, it said to those folks, actually there's a lot of fear, and a lot of the fear it's being used to point at another person as the issue, and the issue is that 12%, as Stacey Ann talked about in her poem, pointing the finger at each other, instead of us realizing that there is this ruling class that is taking this moment and has been taking all these moments to continue to put us down and to continue to lay out the groundwork for 46 states, for the Senate, for the Congress, to run on a platform that is not about us. And these elections said to me as a woman, as an immigrant, as a queer woman, we don't want you here, we don't care about you. And I think what we need to do now is say, I am here and I don't care what you say, but I'm also here for my Muslim community. Like, I don't have to be Muslim to care about them. I don't have to be Black to care about the Black community. A lot of people may not be immigrants, but you don't have to be an immigrant to care about the immigrant community and the queer community, because at the end of the day, they don't want any of us, but all of us together are more. And I think.
And do you think that might be difficult to stand together in that way if there's more support in the government for some and not for others? For example, Trump has been fairly positive toward LGBTQ rights compared to some of the other groups. He said marriage is settled law. He doesn't care what bathrooms people use. So what if there turns out to be a split of support from the government? Will that mean a divide among peoples in the movements?
I first think that our liberation is not necessarily going to come from politicians or bills, or them saying that they're going to support bills or certain people. I think on the LGBTQ issue, he may support white LGBTQ folks, with all my respect, but he doesn't care about a queer trans woman of color in a detention center that is being put in isolation, just like a black queer woman maybe also be put in isolation in a prison. He doesn't care about them. And that's why it's currently so important to work in those intersections and say, like, I'm not just an immigrant, right? Like, I'm not just a woman. I am the face of all this community that has fought for me to be here. I am now here because a lot of folks fought for the civil rights movement, and I, as a woman, can vote because women in the past can vote. And I think we need to move forward understanding that we can't continue to fight on one issue, that we have to fight on all these issues, because if we don't stand up for each other, then at the end of the day, then no one's going to be able to stand up for me.
Commissioner, you're in a different position because you work for city government. How is the city government generally, and your Immigration Affairs Department specifically, gearing up for anticipated policy changes ahead?
Sure. So, I think one thing I'll say is, as we've discussed, it's a little bit hard to predict what might happen in terms of policy, even from during the electoral campaign, during the campaign, hearing a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment in our area. So what we've done is actually brainstormed. It was not a super fun activity, but thinking through, based on what was said during the campaign, all of the possible things that could happen, and then starting to prepare for that in terms of threats, right? The possible loss of an incredible program that young people fought for. It's a program called DACA. It was really something for dreamers that prevents deportation and provides work authorization and has positively impacted tens of thousands of young people in New York. The notion of this Muslim registry, which were sort of, existed in some form in the past and could come back under the new president. Ideas of mass deportation and threats to defund cities for programs that are thoughtful about how it is that we want to use our police, and it's not as an arm for immigration enforcement. Issue after issue after issue, we've been sort of thinking about how do we prepare for that, and not just prepare as a city with our allies and organizing and elsewhere, but also across the country. So other cities coming together and sort of speaking with the same voice. Because I think one thing that's really important to think about in some of what we're facing is that, one, we still have the opportunity to be proactive. And local governments, at least in the immigration space, have been doing some pretty incredible things over the last few years. Creating municipal ID programs, investing in legal services for immigrants, doing a number of different things to make life better for those for whom federal law was still not working. We also have the opportunity collectively to push back against what might be coming. One city speaking out is great, but 200 of them together, much, much better. And so I think that's certainly how we've been thinking, in a way, along the same lines as others, of organizing, and organizing ourselves as local governments. And so much of the threats that we face are obviously in many ways threats to humanity, to people in general, but they're also a very anti-urban agenda, and something we have to be very thoughtful and aware of.
And if I had to guess, I would guess that there won't be, and I think they've started to give reassurances about this, a mass deportation force coming for people who are here illegally just because they're here illegally. It will be for people who've committed some kind of crimes who they don't want protected by sanctuary city programs like here in New York. That might be more of a wedge issue out in the country, whereas the other thing is just too unpopular and looks too much like a police state. Can you defend, how will you make your case outside of New York, where it's not that hard, that the sanctuary city program doesn't just give protection from deportation to people who might not deserve it because they've committed crimes?
Sure, so I will say I have strong feelings on this. The sanctuary city issue, I think, has become so politicized and so distorted. So this notion of sanctuary cities is sort of in a rhetorical line that talks about individuals as illegal, that talks about immigration reform as amnesty, and tries to treat cities now as harboring criminals and harboring bad guys. And that's not at all what's happening. The sort of policies that a place like New York has adopted will say we will not cooperate with ICE for individuals who have not committed serious and violent felonies. This is a public safety measure more than anything else. We want New Yorkers, immigrant New Yorkers, to report crimes, to be witnesses to crimes, to participate and feel safe participating with law enforcement. That's really what's happening here, and instead the way in which that rhetoric is being used is actually to turn it against cities for being thoughtful and smart about how it is that they manage their own cities.
Opal, are the next 4 years likely to just be a matter of playing defense against the possible retrenchment of progress that's been made, or can you still work in Black Lives Matter and across movements for actual progress?
I believe that we have to focus on our survival, and I mean that quite literally. I don't take for granted any type of measure that Donald Trump or the entire administration that he has handpicked has set out to do. So I think that we should make sure that we are diligent on all sides and make sure that we resist all of the repressive measures. I imagine that there are things that we can do to make some level of progress, and that really has to do with our ability and our convictions when it comes to telling the truth. One of the things that many people thought when we started Black Lives Matter was that speaking about anti-Blackness in public with a Black president was unfavorable, was unnecessary. However, we proved to the world that it was mandatory for us to continue to be unapologetic about the conditions that we're faced with and unapologetic about the fact that we are humans, we have dignity, that we are here and we deserve better. And so I believe that we will have to continue to do much of the same. And I believe that each and every one of us is going to need to account for how we want our own stories to be written about us in the future. We need to know where we stand and how history will talk about us in this particular moment. And really, what type of life, what kind of society do we want right now in the present? There are a lot of things that we can do. Businesses can refuse to comply, right? Businesses can refuse to hand over migrant workers. Businesses can agree to harbor people as they are threatened. So I imagine that we're gonna come up against a time where activists like myself might become targets for speaking out for human rights and social justice. And I'm gonna need every single person that believes in what we do to stand with me and to say, hey, come into my home, come into this establishment. We're gonna stand alongside you. If you get arrested, we're getting arrested too. We need that type of very real, lived solidarity. One last thing. And we also need people, if there are hate crimes taking place in front of you or in your community, you cannot just be a bystander. It is your job, it is your duty to intervene. We can't let the status quo continue as it has.
So in our last couple of minutes for this panel, Shaun and Natalia, let me get you on this idea. Dr. King led the most famous March on Washington. How about the message of the Women's March on Washington this coming Saturday, if you're both going to be taking part? I've heard it described more and more broadly as it's come closer. Like it's by women, but it's not only for women. It's not only about women's issues. Natalia, are you involved, and how would you say what the march actually is?
So I am going on Saturday, and I'm not organizing a huge group. I think other folks are, but I'm going to support, and I'm going to, all respectfully say, like, I'm here as a woman, and I'm here regardless whether you want me to be here or not, and I'm here to fight back, and you will not dictate in my body, you will not dictate in my life, and you will not dictate in the work that I do. And I think now more than ever, our presence in all of these issues, it's a matter of resistance, it's a matter of fighting back, and we need also cis men to be there with us, and we need all the LGBTQ family, and we need gender non-conforming folks, and we need to say, like, we're all here together for women, and it needs to be also or femme-presenting and identifying, and we need to also say it's of all shades. This is not just like a white women-led issue, it's all of us leading this issue.
Shaun.
Yeah, we're supporting it. My two teenage daughters who are here with me, they're going. My wife is going as well. I'll be across the country on that day. But Tamika Mallory, who was originally scheduled to be on this panel, is one of the organizers. And I did want to say that the original organizers of this march, it's a Muslim woman, a black woman, a Latino woman, and it has grown. What initially was just, we need to march. It was just an idea, and that's how ideas start, has grown into something amazingly powerful. And we hope and believe that the crowds for the Women's March will be much larger than the crowds for Donald Trump's inauguration. And I think that would be a powerful image that would last for the historical record. And then, Brian, one last thought is, you asked Opal the question, will we just be on defense, or will there be opportunities for us to go on offense? And it is true that we will be on defense a lot more, but I would like to quote Bruce Lee, who says the best defense is a good offense. And right now, to me, there are many ways that we can go on the offensive, and one of those ways is holding our progressive leaders accountable. And New York is thought all around this state, and all around the country, rather, to be one of the most progressive states in the country. But I was shocked to learn that there are 2 states in the United States that automatically try 16-year-olds as adults for all crimes. One would not surprise you. One is North Carolina, which has become, in essence, our modern-day Mississippi. But the other is New York. And when I found out that New York and North Carolina are the only 2 states in the country that automatically prosecute 16-year-olds as adults for all crimes, I was appalled. And one of the ways that we go on the offensive is to do something that we have not been doing. And we were so glad to have a black president that we failed to hold local Democratic and progressive leaders accountable for the promises that they made. And so that includes Governor Cuomo here in New York. It includes Mayor de Blasio. It is never the wrong time to hold people accountable for the promises that they've made. And so this is the time where we ask the Democratic Party to step up and change. We ask our Democratic leaders to step up. This can't be 4 years of us complaining about what Trump tweeted last night. We have to organize much in the same way that Republicans said 8 years ago when they lost the Senate and the presidency, and they said, oh, wow, we have to out-organize our way back into office. We now find ourselves in a position where we now have to out-organize our way back into power, and that starts right here.
And by the way, the juvenile versus adult offender issue, Governor Cuomo did propose raising that age in his State of the State address. Now it's going to be a question of whether he can get it through the legislature.
Right.
That means there's an opportunity for focus activism for people who care about that issue.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Please thank our panel, ladies and gentlemen.